Okay, welcome to the first session in the Big Book study, where we are going to start by getting the answers in the back of the book, just like we did in school. So we're going to start with Appendix II, Spiritual Experience. This course is not an AA meeting. We're here to learn specific facts, history, and context for the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous, first published in 1939. Because we have more content to cover than time to cover it, please hold your questions to the last 10 to 15 minutes when we will open up the parking lot for questions and discussions at that time. This is your course. Please help us adhere to our common welfare and help the facilitator start and end on time, manage disruptions, and participate in the parking lot discussion. As you go through this course, we have some other suggested books and materials to acquire that will help you get the most out of this information. Although it's not required, it's encouraged. The Anonymous Press Study Edition of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is basically 4 books in 1 book, and it has a blank page next to each page for your notes. A copy of Pass It On, Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, and the Varieties of Religious Experiences by William James, which is the only other book mentioned in the first 164 pages of our textbook. And I'm told you can now get this free through iTunes, which would be fine. It's easier to listen to for most of us than to read because it's got late 1800s type writing from a scholarly man named William James. So it's better to listen to it. I've listened to the whole thing 3 times, and I have already pulled out some of the highlights and made worksheets for them for you through the Big Book study. It is known that during the first year of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson walked around with this book under his arm, and I believe where he got the term higher power from. But this book actually defines what a spiritual experience is. So we will go over that in the Big Book study. A dedicated notebook or notepad, a dictionary. We have an exercise on page 47. There are actual instructions on page 47 that require us to use a dictionary. So we will be going through that together. And the annotated AA handbook, which is a companion to the Big Book by Frank D. All right, so let's get started. Appendix 2, Spiritual Experience. Spoiler alert, the solutions are in Appendix 2. So what is the solution to our malady? Well, the answer is the spiritual experience. But what is it? And how do we get it? We are going to answer that question for you. In 1941, Bill Wilson made this statement in the Grapevine. Now, if you know, the book was published in 1939, so just 2 years after the publication of the book, Bill Wilson found that it was necessary to make this statement, which is our first obligation to the newcomer is an adequate presentation of the program. Notice that it says the program, not my program or Bill's program. It's singular. It's the same answer for all of us afflicted with alcoholism. So what is your experience? Do you feel you've gotten adequate presentation of the program? Do you know what a spiritual experience is? And do you know how to get it? These are just the speaker notes here, which I've already said. All right, so let's dive in. The terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which upon careful reading shows the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. So we have a lot to ask ourselves just with the first sentence. What is a spiritual experience? What is this personality change? And when they say us, among us in many different forms, who is the us that they are referring to? Is it the people that I'm sitting with in a meeting in 2024? No, we weren't around when this sentence was written. The us refers to the first 100 men and women of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when we say things like, if you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, let's pause there and ask, who is the we? Again, the people that I'm sitting with in a room of AA in 2024 are not the people that they are writing about. It's the first 100 men and women. Do I want what they had? And am I willing to do what they did? These are important questions to ask, and we are going to address them in this big book study. I was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for multiple years and wasn't able to answer those questions until I went through the big book study. So the personality change sufficient to recover. We are going to cross-reference page 27 to answer that, right? So page 27, this is a conversation between Dr. Carl Jung and Roland Hazard from the Oxford group. So Dr. Carl Jung says to Roland Hazard, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. All right. So even with or without being drunk or having alcohol in my body, I still have an alcoholic mind. The mind of an alcoholic, the mind that is the problem, cannot solve the problem. That's my dilemma. I have never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you. Well, our friend Roland Hazard felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. And, Roland Hazard was, he had some money, he had some clout. So he says to the doctor, oh my God, well, is there no exception? Right? He's used to be given exceptions in life based on his socioeconomic status. Well, Dr. Carl Jung, he says, yes, there is exceptions to cases such as yours, right? And what's the case? That you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. Have been occurring since early times, here and there once in a while. Well, I want to ask myself, how often is that? I would say rare. I would say not very often, and certainly not enough for all the people in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? This is a rare occurrence. So exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena, unexplainable. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements, ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. In fact, I've been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement within you. With many individuals, the methods which I employed are successful, but I have never been successful with an alcoholic of your description, beyond human aid. We have to get down to causes and conditions. We have to understand what is driving us. And that's what the steps facilitate, right? We take an inventory in step 4, and we give it away in step 5. Those have to be cast out. And thankfully for us, we have a process in which to do that. So Appendix 2 came later, right? Because we know that Bill Wilson had basically a white light experience. But we also know that Bill went to visit Dr. Bob, spent 15 minutes with him, which we're going to talk about at length later, where he came at him from the physical aspect of alcoholism instead of the spiritual. He did not go in hot and heavy with the spiritual solution. He came in first trying to convince him of the physical aspect of alcoholism, the theory of the phenomenon of craving. So a lot of early AAs thought they had to have a white light experience like Bill Wilson, but we know now that is not the case. So they added on Appendix II later to give us this information that there is an educational variety, which Dr. Bob had, and it is just as effective for long-term sobriety. And if you want to read in detail about Bill Wilson's spiritual experience, that's on page 120 and Pass It On. It's a couple of pages long, and I encourage you to read it. But know that you don't have to have such a spectacular white light experience, that we can have the educational variety. All right, so let's talk about, we are going to use an everyday problem. We're going to use a problem-solving process that we use for everyday problems, and then I'm going to show you how it's the same way the big book is set up, and we're going to use this to solve our problem of alcoholism. So I'm going to ask you to assume that we all arrived together in a car, and we're 5 miles away from any other buildings or people. There's only a phone. And when we're ready to leave, the car won't start. So what actions would we logically take? Well, if my car didn't start, I wouldn't immediately put gas in it, right? That's not logical. The first thing I would do is probably poke around and try to identify what the problem is. I might look under the hood where the battery cables are to see that there is a charge coming through. Sometimes around the battery cables, you get that white buildup and it prevents a spark on your battery. I might check the key, maybe the starter doesn't work, just some common things, the radiator, the water overheating, just some common things to look at, right? Before I took action, I would conduct an investigation. Well, I did that. Okay, we have a handout we can provide to you on this as well. So I look under and I realize that the battery is dead. Like it's clear there's no charge coming to the car. So now I have identified the problem. And I have to ask myself, do I have a brand new battery in my purse I could just throw in this car and we're ready? No, I don't have another car battery. So I realized that I'm going to have to call someone for help. And in this case, it could be AAA with their overpriced battery unit truck coming out and giving you an overpriced battery. But hey, it solves the problem. So now that I've thought this through in my head, my car still doesn't work though, right? Because the action hasn't been taken. I've only identified and admitted the problem. Then I formed a belief around how I'm going to fix the problem. Now I have to make a decision to actually call AAA. Now I have to actually call them. So I pick up the phone, call the numbers. They come out, they put in a new battery in the car, and we're off and running. So this is a normal process by which we solve problems in real life. And it is the same way that our big book is set up. So the investigation in our big book is the beginning of the book up until page 59. Here's the thing. When you open up your big book, the first thing is not step 1. It does not ask you to admit you're an alcoholic on page 1. That does not happen until page 60. So everything leading up to admitting the problem is up to page 60. And I want to show you this here. Here is a copy of this section from the original manuscript. Okay. Our description of the alcoholic The chapter to the agnostic and our personal adventures before and after have been designed to sell you three pertinent ideas. A, that you are alcoholic and cannot manage your own life. B, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism. C, that God can and will. I wish they kept the sentence in, but here it is. If you are not convinced of A, B, and C, you ought to reread the book to this point or else throw it away. Boom. You either are or you are not convinced of these vital issues. If you are convinced, well, you're at step 3. So this is how we understand where we are in the book and where the steps happen. So we're going to go through this investigation together and become convinced of A, B, and C. Okay. The pine box analogy. So here's the thing. Let's say that someone suffers from anaphylactic shock. And you know, I'm not sure that anaphylactic shock is the best example. I have another one, but I just simply can't remember the name of it right now. But there are things that can happen to us physically and medically where we appear dead. And let's just say that a person goes through this and they're buried and put 6 feet under. All of a sudden they wake up and become aware of their situation, right? And they start banging on the box. They start screaming and yelling, help, get me out of here, help, help, help. But no one can hear them because they're 6 feet under. That person would need an absolute miracle to get out of that box. Well, with alcoholism, when you're beyond human aid, we have people walking around in pine boxes thinking that there's no problem, or not being desperate enough to get this miracle to get out of the box, right? Mainly because they're not convinced of A, B, and C. All right, so we are back on, we had just gone through the first sentence in Appendix 2. Now we're going back to Appendix 2. So among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. What they're talking about here is the white light. It does happen, but it's by no means mandatory. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time. Quite often, friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. He finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, that such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than ourselves. Since William James is the only other book mentioned in our big book in the first 164 pages, I think it's really important that we understand some of the concepts that are in that book. And again, Bill Wilson relied heavily on that information. And within Varieties of Religious Experience, he identified 7 attributes of a spiritual experience. I have made a worksheet on those 7 attributes to share with you. Okay. Now we also see here that it says we have tapped an unsuspected inner resource. Basically, they're telling us the location of God. When I was a little girl, you know, being born in San Diego, there's a lot of Christians, Catholics, things like this. My first ideas of God that were given to me was that he was up in the sky, you know, on a throne, looking down on us, judging us, that it was out there, way out there. What we're hearing here is that God is within. God is within. And as alcoholics, we have not had access to that. We are dying behind not having access to God within. So we're going to go to page 55 right now. So please pick up your books and go to page 55 in the big book. We're cross-referencing to give us the location of God. I'm going to start on the second paragraph on page 55. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured. Obscured means blocked off, can't get to it, by calamity, pomp, and worship of other things. What do you take an inventory of step 4? Right? What did we already talk about? That these things need to be cast out. The steps are not a process of putting more into you. They are a process of facing and removing what is blocking you off from having access to God within. This is a process of removal. You are already whole, complete, and perfect as you are. We need to cast out what is blocking us off from living in that. But in some form or other, it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are as fact as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of a God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly. Actually, most of the time, we have to search fearlessly within. There are no wimps on the spiritual path. This will require courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's fear is present, and I'm doing it anyway. I'm doing it anyway. I'm looking within. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. Again, not up high in the sky, inside. He's been with you all the time. He's never not been with you. The silent observer that's been with you when you were searching through the carpet for cocaine, stealing, lying, hurting others, always been there. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. Only. So right off the bat, you get the location of God. Right on. So that's what we're out. We are on a quest here to get in touch with that, to remove what's blocking me off from having a spiritual awakening, an awareness of the great reality within. So most emphatically, with emphasis, we, the first 100 men and women, wish to say that any alcoholic, who does that leave out? No one. It leaves out no one. So most emphatically, we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover. Let's pause there for a second. We talked about how the first 60 pages are the investigation. So we are going to go through the investigation together and get honest with ourselves, we don't need to worry about getting honest with another person right now. Getting honest with ourselves as we go through that investigation and say, yes, that's me too. So if we can do that, we can recover, provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts. How many concepts does that leave out? None. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable. So willingness is demonstrated only by action. You know, us alcoholics, we have a mind with a turbocharge, right? If it was a car, it would be the fastest darn car that you could buy. We have this mind that thinks and thinks and thinks. So I could think about, oh, I am going to write my 4th step. I am going to do my inventory. I'm going to make amends, but I haven't actually done it, right? So it's demonstrated only by action. And honesty is, it's really hard for us to come here as newcomers and all of a sudden not tell a lie, right? We'll see that there's another part in the big book that says, once in a while, he may tell the truth. So just assume that people new to AA are liars. And it's not because, you know, just leaving aside the morality of it, they're so driven by fear that they can't do anything else. That will come with time. We have to get over some things though. So this is not about, oh, all of a sudden I'm an AA member and I'm gonna stop lying. This is about honesty, introspection, getting honest with myself and awareness of where I'm at in this program. Where am I on the 12 steps? Where am I in the big book? That kind of self introspection, honesty, that's what we need. And an open-mindedness to all spiritual concepts. Well, that was terrifying to me more than anything because I had so many dislikes, so many prejudices around religion and spirituality. And oh my God, how could I possibly be open to everything in the world? It's impossible. Okay, well, let's stop for a second here and look at the 12 steps. There are certain spiritual concepts in our steps. We have prayer and meditation, introspection, and service to others. Are you open to that? None of that has a religious connotation. It doesn't have to anyway. Prayer and meditation, introspection, and service to others. Are you open to that? Okay. There is a chart that I usually do on the whiteboard when it comes to this. Where I put what you need to recover on one side and what will keep you from recovering on the other side. What keeps us from recovering is an attitude of intolerance, of belligerent denial. So if you look those things up, right, intolerance means not taking in someone else's viewpoint. Belligerent denial is warlike or aggressive behavior. And just take a look at mankind's history. Is there warlike and aggressive behavior over spiritual ideas, right? I mean, have people fought over what we call God or what religion is better? You know, we got to put that aside. And what we're asking right now is just to have an open mind to the first 164 pages. And none of that has to be covered in religion. Again, am I willing to do prayer and meditation? Am I willing to look within, see what's going on inside my own being? And am I willing to be service to other human beings? So that is the end of the very first section of the big book. Now I'll open up the parking lot.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a few questions. So when you began, you had said what they had, I forget what it was referencing, but my question is, what did they have then, the first however many people, that is different than what we have now in 2024?
What a great question.
Okay.
Yes, I was referring to how it works, which we read at the beginning of like every meeting. It says, if you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it. That could be answered on page 25 in the second paragraph.
Okay.
The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we, which are the first 100 men and women, have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and towards God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. Do you want that?
Okay. If you're asking me, the answer is yes, but I understand. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then the other question that I have that kept coming up, so I'll just, because I wrote it down a few times, but I'm understanding that this is the problem is a spiritual malady. There's several things, but what I heard very strongly is a spiritual malady. And the solution is in Appendix II. I heard you say that. My biggest concern, I suppose, when as I've mentioned, I had long-term sobriety, 14 years. When in January of 2009, I felt like I had a white light experience, and it was profound. It was immediate. There was a personality shift change. It was white light experience. This time around, it feels more like the educational variety. And that's disappointing and that's concerning. But so I guess the question that I had was, I feel like I had that before, where there was this absolute knowing of God, and it was immediate, and it was profound. And now coming back after a year relapse, after many years, I'm like, I feel like I'm not so sure. Not that I don't believe that God is within, because I do believe that. It's just felt more difficult to tap it into, but I think that might be around some of the honesty that you were talking about, and not being perhaps not being willing, right? The how, not being willing, or just falling into that defect of alcoholics tending to be dishonest because they're so driven by fear. And that idea that calamity, as you mentioned, calamity, I wrote down after what I've heard, is that calamity is blocking me from the God within. And so would that be accurate to say that that might be why this time the spiritual experience hasn't been this white light experience, because there's been compounded years and years of calamity, or an unwillingness to be honest about this relapse?
You make a really, really great point. Thank you for asking that question. So as we know, steps 10, 11, and 12 are the maintenance steps, right? What we have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual experience. And I'm also going to ask you to go to the bottom of page 14, where it says faith without works was dead.
Yeah.
And how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he didn't work, he would surely drink again. And if he drank, he would surely die.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple things going on here. We have the maintenance steps of 10, 11, and 12, writing out our columns on a daily basis, where you get down to that fear and practice that introspection going forward. And then we have the vigorous self-sacrifice, the hard work of helping other people through the big book, through the steps. So I like to think of us as like bodybuilders, weightlifters, right? Like if you get a weightlifter and he's got a competition or something like that, and he's shining out on one day, and then the following week he takes a break, or he takes a break for 4 weeks or whatever, his muscles diminish. So we don't stop lifting those weights. We have to constantly be engaged in these spiritual activities, or we drink again. That's the promise of the book. If I fail to perfect and enlarge my spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, it literally says that. And then it says our lives depend on our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. So take a look at your experience. I don't doubt that you had that white light experience. It's not a permanent thing. We have to continue to work at it.
Right. And yes, regarding what you said, so, before the physical relapse, there was a period of time of physical sobriety that was maintained. but I did not have hard self-sacrifice work with other alcoholics by any stretch of the imagination. Maintenance steps to keep me sober, absolutely not. There was that's just a hard no right there. And so those things that you mentioned were absolutely it wasn't even remotely being done. And it took years of suffering soberly until finally I picked up a drink, truly believing that it would be one drink. So yes, that
Yeah.
answers my question. Absolutely.
Yeah, and when people, relapse and come back to meetings, the top answer I hear for that, their top explanation was, I stop attending meetings. That is not in our big book.
Right.
Meetings are only mentioned twice as a way to find a newcomer. When it talks about why we slip, why we relapse, it's because we failed to perfect in a larger spiritual life. We failed to help other alcoholics, or it clearly states that if our sexual conduct hurt someone else, we are sure to drink if we're
Yep.
not sorry for what we've done. So there are reasons why one could slip after a spiritual experience.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's 100% what happened. Looking back. Absolutely.
So I'm so glad you and I are doing this work right now together.
Me too. Thank you. Yeah, that was it. Those are my questions. Then I wrote down a lot of things that made a lot of sense. But those were the two big questions that came up for me.
Those are great questions. I am so glad you asked them. I'm going to stop the recording and then you and I can have some one-on-one time.
Okay.